Melina. I am from Arizona in the U.S., where I was teaching at Arizona State University before coming here. I don't know, ASU has a partnership with Fulbright, so some professors have had the opportunity to go there, so I don't know if any of you in this room have been able to go there, but if you have, you're very welcome. And if you haven't yet, go and try it. So yes, I'm an EMI advisor here at NCUST. So I'm actually on the 10th floor of this building. Are you still hearing? Did it stop? I can talk really loud. You know, teaching, you have to be able to talk loud for everyone to hear you, right? Okay, so today our topic is learning transfer, and I'm going to address different things that can hinder students from transferring their learning, as well as different techniques to try and help students apply their learning, so that we don't have the problem of, I gave this great lecture, why are my students not showing evidence of learning anything on the test? These different strategies I'm going to be talking about are separate from a specific technology. So you can incorporate technology into any of them, but you don't have to. The mediums that you choose to use are totally up to you. Okay. So our learning objectives for today are as follows. So we're going to actually do an icebreaker. So I would love for you guys to know each other a little bit. It will also help me to get to know you a little bit, because you are my audience, so the more I know what your needs are, the better. Then we're going to define key transfer terminology. I'm going to use several terms throughout this whole workshop, and so I'm going to define them for you, and I'm also going to have you. Did it go off again? And then I'm actually going to have you guys follow along. I'm going to have a handout for you to follow along, so you'll also be able to take anything that we do with you. We'll do a quick comprehension check, and then identify existing transfer strategies. This has to do with small group discussions as well as KWL chart, which I'll go over what that means. Then we'll analyze common scenarios and identify application strategies to increase engagement and transfer. This will be small group discussions. These will be hopefully common scenarios that you encounter as professors here at the university. And lastly, you'll create a transfer promoting activity. The idea is that you have something to take with you at the end back to your classes that is relevant, so you can transfer your learning to your classes as well. So the very first thing we have is an icebreaker. So I'll introduce myself and show you what it looks like first. So just a few questions, 4 questions, well, 3 questions plus a little activity. The first question is, what is your name? So my name is Melina. Sorry. What do you teach? She's already introduced, but I taught. I have taught. Can you guys hear me in the back? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's okay. I'm used to it. So I have taught English as a second language, English as a foreign language here in Taiwan. I have taught like rhetoric and composition, first-year composition, as well as like the 4 skills: reading, writing, listening, speaking, as well as pronunciation and some ESP. And what do you hope to gain from today's workshop? What I hope to gain is a better understanding of your needs and how I can help you. And then the last part is a little special thing for each person. So it's make your own ID. So it's not an official ID number. This is a series of numbers that has some kind of meaning to you personally. So an example is here at the bottom. I put little dashes, and I'll explain why. So the first number is 7, simply because 7 is my favorite number. So like when I played soccer when I was in school, 7 was always my jersey number, like that. 6221 is for my family. I have 6 people in my family, including myself and my 2 parents, 2 sisters, and 1 brother. And then 2010 is the year 2010 because that was the first time I lived in Taiwan. I lived in Zhongli for a year. And then 2013 was the second year I lived in Taiwan. I lived in Tainan. And I went to the Huayu Zhongxin at Chenggong Daxue. And then 2026 is my return to Taiwan. Obviously, I like Taiwan, so I came back again. And I'll be here next year as well. So this is a little bit about me, and that's an example of my ID number. So I'm going to put the timer on for 5 minutes, and I would like you guys to actually, you can stand up, move around, get into a group of, let's say, 3 people or 4 people, and answer these questions and share your ID number. You can write it down, jot it down on any piece of paper, or just share what your numbers are. Okay? So I'll start the timer. Do you have any questions before we begin? Okay. Here's our timer. So go ahead and find at least 2 people nearby you and introduce yourself. So our 5 minutes is up. I hope you got to meet your colleagues, get to know them a little bit better, because if you remember from our learning objectives, I said we'll be doing small group discussions more than one time. So you can continue to work with the people who you just met, okay? If you need to adjust the groups a little bit, move around, that's also fine, but you will continue to work with with your colleagues. Okay, so we're going to look at the foundations of learning transfer. Before I give you all the definitions, I'm going to pass out a paper to you. So we're going to do something called KWL. Is anyone familiar with KWL? No? Okay, great. I'll get to teach you something new. So KWL stands for, K is for know, like what do you already know? W is for what? It's to ask questions. What questions do you have? What do you expect to learn? What do you hope to learn? What questions do you have about the topic? L at the end is learn. What did you learn? We're going to wait to do L until the end, okay? So right now, basically what we're doing is previewing. We're thinking ahead. We're activating the knowledge that you already have. That's for the purpose of this. So when you're thinking about for your own students, this is something that you can do. So everything that I'm trying to do today is something that I hope you can also use with your students. So I will stop and periodically say the purpose of the strategy. So the first one is, like I said, K, and then W. So I'm going to give you a couple minutes, and I would like you to just write down what do you already know about the topic. If it's nothing, you can write down nothing. If it's something, write down what you know. And then W, what questions do you have? Please feel free to write down any questions that you have, because you never know what might come up. Okay, so again, there's no right or wrong, this is just activating prior learning. Okay, if you didn't write very much, don't worry. This is the previewing activity, so by the end, you should be able to fill out at least one thing for L, what did you learn? If you don't know what learning transfer is yet, we're about to explain it. Okay, so learning transfer can be defined in a few different ways according to the researchers, and I have chosen Perkins and Solomon, 1992, because this is kind of the seminal work. So all of the references that I have in the presentation are like the seminal works. That's why they're older, but all of the research is built off of these. So according to Perkins and Solomon, transfer occurs when learning in one context enhances or undermines a related performance in another context. Now you'll see on your paper here in the middle section, it says key transfer terms and definitions. The terms are all blank and the definitions are provided. So while we're going through the presentation, you can fill in the key terms. Okay, so you'll find the key terms that are going to be up here. All right, so the first one, where it says, when learning in one context impacts performance in another, that is, what's the key words? Learning transfer. So you can fill in learning transfer. So learning transfer is an important topic in education because arguably it's the whole reason we teach. We want our students to take what they learn in class and apply it to future classes, to future courses in their major, from freshman year to senior year, onto the workplace, and hopefully into their lives as well. They're learning, critical thinking skills. We want them to be able to think critically, not just for engineering, but when they're purchasing a car or something like that. We want them to be able to transfer those skills into their lives, right? So it's arguably the purpose that we teach. So it can be taken for granted that students are going to transfer their learning. It is not guaranteed. Just because we present information doesn't mean they're automatically going to learn it and apply it. But sometimes, as educators and students as well, assume that they don't have to put effort into applying the learning. If I'm going to apply it, it's just going to happen. Some of the research shows straight from the horse's mouth. You know that idiom? Straight from the horse's mouth. It means from the students themselves. They said that they didn't think they needed to practice to apply their learning. That it should just happen. Okay? Which we can think that's not true, but sometimes we even might make assumptions that our students are going to do something when they're not able to. So we need to use different strategies to help raise their awareness and help them understand how they can apply their learning. And I'm sure everyone in here has done probably at least one of the things that I'm going to present today. The difficulty with learning transfer is that, not that we don't ever do it or teach for transfer, the problem is that it's not usually sustained, it's not usually systematic in our approach to designing courses. So all of these approaches, all these strategies that we're going to talk about today as well, you can consider not just for a single class period, but for an entire course design. So from day one of your course to final day, you can use these strategies throughout to help them prepare them for whatever comes next. So it really is intentional on our parts to help our students be able to transfer their learning. Okay, so let's take a moment and reflect. So discuss with your group, why do you think we did an icebreaker activity? What skills did you use to complete the icebreaker activity? And do you think there's any application of the icebreaker in one of your classes? What modifications would you make? How would it look in your class? So you have a few questions here. So I'm going to give you, let's do 5 minutes again. I don't have the timer, but I'll keep time. So get back with your group, and each person can share for a minute or two to answer these questions. Okay? So this is a reflective activity, and I hope that you're already catching on that reflection is part of one of the strategies for encouraging learning transfer. Okay? So let's take 5 minutes. So right now we're at 2:30, so 2:35. Okay? Thank you for your participation. And I wanted to ask you, why do you think I had you do an icebreaker activity? I'm sorry, I can call on you, like I can put to you, but I don't know your names. I apologize. So do I have any volunteers?
Hey.
Any what?
That's why you call icebreaker.
Can anyone take a guess?
It's really nice to get to know your friend, right?
Yeah.
Especially Taiwanese students, very shy. So, yeah. So I think it's nice to have icebreakers.
So if you didn't hear, he said it's nice to get to know your friends, and Taiwanese students tend to be shy. Okay, have you experienced that as well?
Yeah.
I've also experienced that in teaching Taiwanese students. students in the same classroom from Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait, and China, and Taiwan, and Japan, and Korea, and they're all from different places, and some of them are very shy, and some of them are very talkative. They all have totally different experiences, right? So doing something where they get to know each other can lower what's called the affective filter. Basically, it's our brain's like defense mechanism. We will say, okay, it's safe, I can like lower my filter so that I can let information in. So let me ask, have any of you done an icebreaker kind of activity? It doesn't have to be this one, something similar, or any kind of activity that's an icebreaker activity in your classes before? Yeah, can raise your hand. Yes, you have? Okay. Was it effective for helping with small group work? A little, okay. So if you haven't done one before, do you think that you could do something like this in your class? Okay, so that's an example of learning transfer. Learning in one context is affecting learning in another context. So what you're learning here, you could apply to your class and have your students do. That's an example of learning transfer. Okay. So these questions are designed to prompt you to consider your own learning transfer, and both from the past, your past experiences, as well as future possibilities. When we transfer our learning, we can pull from the past and we can also project it into the future. And one of the objectives is to identify existing transfer strategies. What have you already done? So, again, periodically I'm going to point out what we're doing in the workshop so that you hopefully are more aware and see how it can transfer into your classes. Okay, so types of transfer. We have positive and negative, near and far, and low road and high road. Okay, so these definitions are listed on your paper, and the first one we're going to talk about. Oops. First are positive and negative. So positive is first. Positive transfer is kind of what it sounds like. It is positive carryover. So it is a correct application of learning into a new context. Okay, so one of the common examples I like to give is something like, if you're a Chinese speaker, the common structure of Chinese is subject, verb, object. In English also, it's subject, verb, object. You can take that information that you learned from Chinese and apply it to English, and that's positive, right? It's a correct application. Now you can also find, both going from Chinese to English or English to Chinese, sometimes there are things that don't work, right? When they don't work, that's called negative transfer. It's an incorrect application. It actually interferes. Okay, so I see this as a language teacher. I see it lots. Okay, for example, in Chinese, when you say the subject and then like an adjective, like I'm hungry. In English, you have to say I am hungry, right? But in Chinese, you just say 我饿了, right? So you don't have 是, you don't say 我是, right? So, like that. If I, as an English speaker, try to say 我是饿, that doesn't work, right? You see someone laugh, it sounds funny, right? Because it's negative transfer, it doesn't work in that situation. Now, this doesn't only apply for language learning. It applies, let's say you have maybe a formula for, let's say, chemistry, and the student incorrectly assumes they can use that formula in a question that they're given. That's another example. So, next is near and far. Okay, so near transfer means you're transferring learning from a similar task or a similar application context to another similar task or application context. So a simple example for our students could be you do a class activity and they perform the same or nearly identical task for homework. And you're checking to see were they paying attention and doing what they were supposed to in class, right? So that's an example of near transfer. This doesn't only apply to schools though. Something like driving a car and taking what you learned and applying that to driving a truck is also considered near transfer. Far transfer is where the application of the learning is in a different or less obvious context. Now, EAP, the example here, EAP is English for Academic Purposes. So let's say students in class they learn in an EAP class a reading strategy. And near transfer might be they do that same reading strategy on the next reading in the next class. Okay, similar context, right? But if they take that and they realize they can apply that same reading strategy to their engineering textbook, that is farther transfer. It's a less obvious similarity. You can also, again, do this in other contexts, not just in education. Something like a mindfulness practice like yoga or drawing, something that's designed to help you calm your nervous system, calm your brain. You could also, if you use that same strategy, let's say in a meeting where things might be getting a little heated, and you're like, you know what? I learned this in yoga or qigong or whatever. I'm going to take that same idea and apply it right now in the meeting. Those are different contexts, but you're applying the learning anyway. That's an example of far transfer. Now, one thing that's useful to understand about this particular type of transfer is that the distance is judged by the learner's perception. So what I might see as near transfer, as an educator, like I'm really familiar with maybe how my students can apply their English skills outside of the classroom or to another subject like engineering. My students might not see that as near though, because for them, they're not used to looking for it. They don't see it yet. So I can help them see. And now it might be far for them, but I can at least help them see it so they can try to still apply that learning. Does that make sense? Questions so far? Yes.
So is there any sort of, when the near is better or far is better, if it's judged by the learner's perceptions, so when I'm doing like transfer, can I assume near is the better way of transferring the knowledge or further away is the better way of doing the knowledge transfer?
That's a great question. I don't think, based on all the research that I've read, there's not a better or worse, because we need to do both. So I think it depends on your purpose. If you want your students to apply their learning and to do far transfer, but you're not doing anything to help facilitate the far transfer, then that's not great, right? Then they might only be able to see and apply their transfer in a very similar context. If your goal is to have them do near transfer, like a classroom assignment to a homework assignment, and they can accomplish it, that's great. They've done what we've asked them to be able to do, shown evidence of learning, right? So I think both are good, just depends on your purpose. That's a great question. So the next pair of transfer types are low road and high road. Low road is an automatic application through repeated practice. This is really like stimulus-based, like behaviorism. Things that we do without really thinking. You know, if I say hello in English, you're probably going to respond with hi or hello in English back, right? Okay, it's an automatic response because it's practiced so many times. You don't have to think about applying that learning. So if it's a formula for a lab report, students have used it many times, and then a new lab report in the same course, you're asking to use the same formula, that is probably going to be low road for them because they can see, yep, I'm just going to automatically apply this formula because I know that it matches this problem. High road takes effort. So high road is mindful, deliberate application to a different context. Often, but not always, high road and far transfer go together. Far is, you know, I'm trying to apply what I'm learning in my English class to my engineering class or something like that, right? Now, to do that, it might take effort. It might not be automatic. Now, some of it might be, but some of it might not be. So That's a kind of example of where you can see it's both far, and if they're going to do it, they're going to have to take some effort to do it. So it's also high road. So something like critical thinking strategies in an English for a specific academic purpose class, and then applying that intentionally, those critical thinking strategies to looking for something totally unrelated to like their university courses, like looking for an apartment. That might be high road. Like, oh, you know what I learned about, maybe I should ask these questions. Let me pause and think about this for a moment. Wouldn't that be great if our students do that? We're like, yes, that's like success. Okay. So it doesn't have to be, again, just education to education. Many of my examples are going to be education to education, simply because that's our context. Okay, so to review, we have positive and negative, and you can write these down. So that's the learning of application to a new context correctly or incorrectly applying it to a new context. Near and far. So near is a similar context or task to another similar context or task. And then far is seemingly different contexts or tasks. And then low road and high road is that automatic recall. We're doing something without really needing to think about it versus intentionally applying that learning to a new context. Questions about the different types of transfer?
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm assuming the so-called low road versus high road is actually dynamic, meaning if they do this enough, eventually it will become spontaneous, right? So like rhetoric writing, like what you described in the beginning, the first time to practice can be extremely hard and spend a lot of time. But if they do practice consistently, then it will become, am I right about that?
Yeah, I think you can definitely argue that. I mean, for example, in like language learning, when you were learning English, you know, even something as simple as, you might be able to do hello, hi, quickly, right? Mm-hmm. But the more advanced questions and responding to those questions might take effort the first few times you do it. And then later, the more you do it, you can do it without thinking about it. It's automatic recall, right? So absolutely, I think that some of these things are going to be more high road initially, but can be kind of switched over to more automatic recall. Okay, we're going to skip this for time, but okay, the last blank on the definitions here is adaptation. The reason I bring up adaptation is simply because sometimes we can be very focused on wanting our learners to show a very specific, the evidence of learning in a very specific way, but especially in language learning, but it can be in other contexts as well. You know, students might be applying their learning, but they are changing it to meet their needs. And so if we are looking for something very specific, we might miss when students are adapting. So it's really just, I wanted to bring it up to have you consider, like, okay, you know, is this really, do I have to have them do it in this specific way, or am I seeing them transfer their learning maybe in a different variation? Yeah. So you might see that in your context if you stop and think about it. Like, I think this was a really good reminder as a language teacher that I might be looking for, hey, are my students remembering to say she walks instead of she walk? But maybe, you know, maybe they're doing something else in that sentence that is showing evidence of learning. And I'm like, oh, you know what, if I pay attention to that, instead of getting fixated on, she didn't say she walks, you know, then I can kind of open my scope to see how are my students adapting their learning. Okay, so the transfer taxonomy framework is not on your paper. However, at the end, if you would like the slides, I will be able to send them to you, so you'll be able to see them. But Marta and Ceci created a taxonomy, which is a really nice framework for being able to see just all the different ways that we're actually asking ourselves or students to transfer learning. So one domain that we are asking people to transfer learning is the knowledge itself, the information. And we can ask them to transfer near or far. So using like in English for English in a foreign language reading skills, in another EFL text would be near. That's knowledge, same knowledge domain to the same knowledge domain. Far transfer could be giving directions in an EFL class and then explaining how to get from place to place in geography class. So they're taking knowledge that they learned in their English class, for example, on giving directions, and then they go to geography class and they're like, you know what, I can do this here too. So that's an example of knowledge. But there's also physical context. Sometimes people get really used to doing something in a place and they don't think about it, they can do it in another place. But we can have students transfer their learning from classroom to classroom, or maybe a classroom to a public setting, classroom to an internship or a job that one of your students might have, something like that. We hope that they're going to transfer, right? That they won't just do it in class, that they'll be able to do it outside of class as well. Temporal context, so this is the time. We are also asking students to transfer their learning across time. If it's near, that means it's a shorter distance of time. If it's far, it's a longer distance. Sometimes we're asking students to apply or transfer learning from, let's say, first semester, like fall semester, to spring semester, right? Or from maybe freshman year or sophomore year to senior year, right? If you're teaching like chemical engineering, we don't want them to forget what they learned in their first 2 years by the time they get to their fourth year, right? We hope that they're still continuing to apply their learning across time. Next is the functional context. This is the purpose that we're having them transfer. So if it's the same task purpose, so it could be again like you have them practice a formula in class and practice a formula in for homework. Or FAR transfer example could be the totally different purposes. So maybe they have a skill that they're doing like summarizing, and we're asking them to transfer that to a report. Okay, so the function there, or the purpose is different. The social context, and this can really shake up students. And I'll go back to language learning here as an example, but I think maybe when you're working with international students and local students, you might be encountering this too. That if they're, let's say, maybe a Taiwanese student is fine talking to another Taiwanese student, and then they're talking to an international student, and they don't feel so comfortable transferring their learning there. I saw this often with my students in the United States. Maybe they're okay in the classroom, but then they go to Starbucks and they can't remember anything they learned in class because they got nervous, It has happened to me before, and I was like, I learned that in class. I was like, what was that word again? And I get up to the window and I'm like, what was that? Okay, so when we encounter new people, it can cause us to get nervous and maybe we don't feel as comfortable or confident transferring our learning. And then the modality is the last one. So maybe reading to reading, that's near transfer. If we're asking them to do reading and then later change to speaking, we're changing the modality. We're still asking them to be able to transfer their learning, but we're changing the modality. So when we're asking students to transfer their learning, in reality, we're really asking them to do a lot. Now, we can narrow it down in our assessments and things, but eventually we want them to be able to do all of these, right? Because we don't want our students to stay in the classroom, to be in the classroom and stay stuck in the classroom and not be able to do anything after that. So are there any questions about the transfer taxonomy framework?
But you're gonna take different class or different actions to allow students to get involved in different kind of dimensions, right?
Might be, yeah. I mean, I think there are some limitations we face when we're in class, right? We're often not able to, for example, change the physical context. That's going to stay near for us. But we might be able to, what we can change is like the functional context or something like that. And we might not do all of these in the same class period, because that might be too much for a student. So you can consider, what am I asking them, like, what's the purpose? And then what am I asking them, where am I asking them to do it, when am I asking them to do it? I don't want to, taking more than one class can be great, especially if you're working on a project that might take several classes or weeks or an entire semester, right? Or those of you who are doing research right now, how long have you been working on research? How long have you been transferring your learning from one project to the next project, from one class to the next class? You're doing this as well. And so, we can do it. Hopefully we'll do it the rest of our lives, right? Yeah, absolutely. So you can focus in on a single class period, a single activity, or you can consider an entire course. Other questions?
Is there a relation between high road and far transfer? Because if I replace the far transfer with high road, does it also work? Does it frame also? Yes.
Yeah, so high road and far transfer often go hand in hand. Yeah. It's not always that way, but they often will go hand in hand. Because to transfer to a farther context, it might require more effort. It's not necessarily going to be automatic. Yeah. It also might be negative because we try and fail the first time, or the first 3 times, or the first 10 times, until we understand what is going to work and positively transfer that learning.
That's exactly how the student try to finish out their master's thesis.
Yeah, because they're doing research, right? They're in a lab and
They need to learn some basics. Then they need to try out, do the far transfer and also do this high-low transfer. Otherwise, they cannot graduate because they need to have something new, right?
Yeah, and we don't want them to just be repeating what everyone else has already done, right? We want them to
That's
try
plagiarism. They do a repeat thing with plagiarism, then they cannot graduate.
Exactly. Any other questions? Okay, so let's go to the next part. So that's kind of the first half. The second half is the teaching strategies. So our 2 different kinds of strategies, the categories are hugging and bridging. Hugging, you can think about, like if you're hugging someone or something, it's close, right? Okay, so hugging strategies focus on low road transfer, that automatic transfer. And so by making learning context closely similar to the real world application, whatever that application is we want them to do. Okay. And then bridging strategies are what it sounds like. A bridge connects 2 things that are otherwise disconnected. So bridging strategies promote high road transfer by encouraging reflection, generalization, and connecting ideas across contexts. And it encourages learners to identify underlying principles. And this is where you also really might see a lot of adaptation. And it's a great idea to use both types of strategies in your teaching. Okay, so hugging strategies in practice. On your paper, this is the next box, the chart, I'm sorry. On the left side, you see the strategy, and it's blank. So we'll go over each strategy, and then the definition and the purpose are listed there for you. So the first strategy is setting expectations. Setting expectations explicitly is telling students where and how they'll use skills and help them anticipate transfer opportunities. I've been trying to do that throughout by saying, you can do this in your class. In your class, you might do this, okay? That's just an example. But students might not see that, but if you set the expectation, they're more likely to see the similarities. The second strategy is matching, which is using discipline-specific materials and realistic problems. It makes learning relevant and transfer more likely. Depending on what you're teaching, you may have to take your materials and simplify them a bit, or take them in smaller chunks, because students might not be able to go through a whole research paper at once or something like that. Maybe you take it section by section. You're looking at the introduction and the conclusion first as a class or something like that. So you're taking it in a smaller piece, but you're using the authentic materials. And sometimes you might need to, especially depending on the language level, simplify it. But if you're simplifying, hopefully you're then building back up to that more authentic, realistic source. And it's not just with reading. Could be videos, could be like news reports, could be anything. Whatever is relevant for your context. Simulating is the next one, and that's using role plays or realistic scenarios that mirror real world communication demands, or whatever the demand is. So this one is great. This is where you have to look over the page. You might have students practice doing some kind of role play where one person's interviewing another person who's the interviewee, and hey, if you're in the situation where you want to get hired at TSMC, and this is the kind of question you might get asked. Can you answer this in an interview? And have them role play that, something like that. And they might get scared and nervous in class, but it's better that they get scared and nervous in class and learn to overcome that there, so that they're prepared for the real thing. Modeling is next, and that is demonstrating the process and product, giving a variety of examples also to support learning transfer. If we just tell students, I want you to write a 10-page paper on, semiconductors. You can say that to them, but what you want to do first is model it. What does that look like? So throughout this, I'm also trying to model different strategies, like what you could actually do in your course. Get your students into groups, have them write things down while you're teaching. So one thing that I think is really important is not just giving them examples of the finished product, but giving them examples of the process. Because I think this is where I'll address AI for just a second. AI takes out the process, right? And so if we are emphasizing the process over the product, then hopefully we're demanding from the students that they keep the cognitive load and not give it to AI. That they're still engaging with the critical thinking and engaging with the learning process. So if we show that the process is really important, I hope we can at least lessen the effects of AI, students using AI in an inappropriate way. So next is problem-based learning. This is similar to task-based learning. Tasks are short, right? Problem-based learning is usually longer, probably over weeks, maybe over a whole semester. So in a chemical reaction engineering class that I've been working with a professor in, students are learning about creating reactors. So they're looking at the same problem basically over the course of the whole semester. How do they do this effectively? How do they make a sustainable, how do they think about sustainability in the process of creating a reactor? So that's the problem-based learning. Okay, so these are the hugging strategies. All of these are emphasizing helping students see the similarities between context and tasks. Now, next slide. Yeah. I'm going to have you guys reflect again, okay? So I have listed here the different strategies and it's on your paper. Here are some questions for you to consider. I'll give you 5 minutes. If you don't answer all the questions, that's fine. If you start with number 3 because you really want to do question number 3 and you don't get to question number 1, that's fine also. But in your group, discuss the following questions. Which hugging strategies have you used in your classes? How often do you use these? And what has been most effective for your students and why? Okay. And if you're having trouble thinking of examples, that's okay too. Maybe your colleague can think of an example and that might prompt something that you've done. Okay. So I will start the timer and we'll have 5 minutes. All right, our slide is up. Go ahead and wrap up your conversation.
Eventually, they have to learn to use the local models.
Let's see.
Because the online model is.
Can anyone give me an example of something that you've used in your class?
The voluntary, but
Because I'm from Department of Architecture,
Okay.
so our teaching philosophy is more straightforward because in the end, student has to design a building or architecture on their own. So we use most of the strategy a lot in our class. We will show them some video regarding how an architect build a building, what is the idea behind that architect, and we also teach them how to, for example, setting up a final expectation for their project and what is the potential problem they might encounter. For example, if the building is on top of the hill or is near the water, the environment change. So that makes you need to figure out the problem occurring in designing the house. So yeah, I think for our department, this strategy is quite useful and we actually use a lot in our class. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
So what I hear you saying is that because when you say we use them a lot, it sounds like you're consistent about using them. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I want to point that out because as I said at the very beginning, one of the weaknesses with teaching for transfer is that we don't always build it into our curriculums, and so we might not be consistent enough about it to maximize the potential for our students to be able to transfer their learning. So if I heard matching, problem-based learning, and setting expectations. Yeah, so that's 3 of the 5 right there, and that's great. It doesn't mean, you don't have to have all of them in every class, right? That's kind of overkill. You don't have to do that. But even just using those 3 and being consistent about it is definitely going to set your students up for more success. To be able to continue to transfer their learning. So that's great. Thank you for sharing. So let's go to the bridging strategies next. Okay, so bridging strategies, the first one that we have is anticipating application. Kind of similar to setting expectations, but all of the bridging strategies are to emphasize high road transfer. So the hugging strategies are for low road transfer, and the bridging strategies are for high road transfer. So we're really trying to get students to think about the learning beyond the near context or the similar context. So the first one, anticipating application, it's prompting students to predict where skills apply. It increases motivation and awareness beyond the immediate task, hopefully. That's the goal, right? So we set expectations and then this is what I want you to do and this is why you're going to do it and here's where you can use it. But we can also prompt students to think beyond maybe just the next class period or the end of the semester where do you see what we're doing in class? Where do you see being able to use it after you finish this class? And if they start to consider that, they are being mindful about, where can I apply it? Now, they might not see it right away, and you might have to give them some examples. But if you give them some examples, they probably have some ideas to bounce off of, and they'll be able to think about more. So if they can't come up with something initially, having a couple of examples is really good to help them. So our second strategy in the second box in the chart is generalizing concepts. This supports identifying underlying principles or rules that apply across contexts. This could be many different things, but we know that there are principles, even something like the idea of, depending on what language you want to pull from, karma, you reap what you sow, this idea you give what you get what you give, like something like that even. Is an underlying principle. We could talk about how that, like, where do you see that principle applying in life? So you could say it applies in my class with my students. If I'm mean to them, they're going to be mean back to me. I could also say, it applies with my family. If I treat my parents dishonorably and I don't respect them, they might be better to me and respect me back, but they might not, right? If I am treating them badly, they might treat me badly, right? I can start to see, this applies here, and it applies here, and it applies to my work, and it applies with this friend, and that person. Okay, so generalizing concepts is helping students see what underlying principles, I'm sure you can probably think of a few in architecture that are like these underlying principles that are really important in architecture that might be applicable in other areas of life or other contexts or other studies, right? So if you can help them see that, that's great, because then they might be more likely to apply those principles in other contexts. Something like, a lot of people will play chess for this reason. Because chess is a game of strategy, right? And so people will often think about how that game applies to life. Or people who have written, like, ancient warriors and generals who have written books about war. People use those principles in business today. So that's an example of generalizing concepts. The third is analogies. This is using comparisons between familiar and new tasks to highlight similarities. So it can help them see the similarities that, it's not obvious, but there is a similarity here. This actually does apply here. Parallel problems. This is applying the same strategy across different tasks or modalities to strengthen connections between different contexts. So let's see if like a student identifies an argument and evidence, just a basic rhetoric or argument in education, right? We want them to have an argument supported by evidence. But if they see it in a written text, and then maybe we're asking them to apply it in a different class or a news, like a news report or something like that, we can ask them to help them to see that those same skills, it's like parallel to, and then the last one is metacognitive reflection. Metacognition is just a fancy word for thinking about your thinking. We as humans have the ability to think about what we think about. We can reflect on our thoughts, our emotions, our physical sensations, how are we feeling in our bodies. Do we feel anxious? Is my stomach tight? How does that, I'm anxious. Oh, what am I thinking about? Oh, I'm worried about, my presentation tomorrow or something like that. So the ability to reflect is very important, and is very important for learning and being able to transfer our learning. So it promotes self-awareness through reflection, monitoring, and evaluating our own learning processes. If students can monitor their own learning process, that's fantastic. We can prompt them to reflect. So for example, when I was teaching composition, I would have my students do like a pre-writing activity where I'd say, okay, this is the assignment. We'd go over the assignment and say, what do you understand so far? What questions do you have? And what's a goal that you have for this assignment? And I'd say, your goal can't be to get 100%. Something else, like something that they can really practice towards, right? And then I would ask them again at the end to reflect on those questions. Okay, how well do you feel like you understand the assignment now? After you've written multiple drafts, were you able to accomplish your goal? Why or why not? What's something you'll do differently and that you want to try to do for the next project, right? So reflective activities, we can give our students the opportunities to reflect. Okay. Questions about this?
When I saw problem-based learning in Hacking, I thought there will be a project-based learning in Bridging, but there isn't. Why?
That's a great question. I think probably because they would still consider it I think they would still consider it a hugging strategy. Yeah, because if we have a project, just like a problem or a task-based learning, I think we're trying to help the students see, we're trying to make it similar to the application, the real-world application. So I think that's probably why it would be still hugging rather than bridging. It's a good question. Okay, let's go to, let me back up actually and address more of his question. I think that with like project-based, task-based, or problem-based learning, because you're doing it over a period of time, you can use other strategies within the problem-based learning or that project. So maybe in one class you're really emphasizing setting expectations and modeling, and then the next class period you're asking them to do more reflective work or something like that. So I think within the PBL or the project-based learning, you could employ different strategies as needed. Okay, so I thought it would be good for us to have a couple of scenarios. We'll do one or two. I don't think we'll be able to do all three. So I know that this is one of the challenges that I've encountered or I've seen professors have, and something that I also have encountered is mixed language proficiencies within a class. So I'll read through the scenario and then I'm going to ask you to discuss with your group, like, what are some strategies, hugging, bridging, or a combination of strategies that might help address this problem. Okay? It doesn't mean it's going to fix everything immediately, but what are some things that might be helpful in a situation like this? So the scenario is, an EMI professor teaches a required mechanical engineering course. International students ask questions and speak often, while many Taiwanese students stay quiet. The professor notices that some Taiwanese students understand the math, but they struggle to explain their thinking in English. Group discussions become unbalanced because only a few students talk. The professor worries that silence is being misinterpreted as lack of understanding. Okay, so maybe they do understand, maybe they don't. Maybe their classmates are misunderstanding because students are being quiet. So how might you address a situation like this that you probably encountered personally? Do any of these strategies help you address a situation like this? Okay? Or you can think about it not just for yourself, but if you want to talk to a colleague comes to you and is like, man, my class, this is the situation today. What advice would you be able to give them? Okay? So let's take, I have the timer for 5 minutes, but for time we might just do 3 or 4, okay? So go ahead and discuss with your group. Thank you for discussing. I hope you were able to think of some strategies that might work in a context like this. Harry and Boyan I was discussing with them in the back and asked them to share a summary of our discussion, what they thought might be helpful in a situation like this. Fancy.
Yes, I think it's working. Yes, thank you. So, well, based on our discussion, I think the most effective ones, in our opinion, would be for the hugging strategies. They are the simulating and the problem-based learning. Because with the simulating, we can kind of like assign roles to the students. I mean, maybe although they are shy to talk about it, but I think it's really good if we can just give them like a little bit role. Let's say one is to give them some ideas and another person like making some notes. So I think that will help each other in order to learn for the concepts. And also I think it will be very good if we can also apply the problem-based learning. I mean, yeah, I think it's over there. It's pretty obvious that the professor is worried whether the students they understand the concept or not. But from the problem-based learning, let's say we give them a case studies, we give them the examples, and then we check about the results. And from there, I think we are pretty sure that the students totally understand about the, let's say, the use of the formulation or the use of the concept. And I think both of those methods will help each other.
Yeah, and we also kind of made a combination a little bit with the bridging strategies, because we were talking about the metacognitive aspect, where maybe we can give them a little bit of time to think about what has been said or the lecture in a sense, and then give them time a little bit like think, pair, share, where they can spend some time gathering their thoughts, see what questions they have, and it can go in tandem with anticipating applications, because we can kind of explain what we're about to do. Let's say we have a group discussion. Maybe here you mentioned some examples like a job interview, but maybe in the future they work in a company where they have a lot of group meetings, so they can really think about, okay, maybe this is something I need to take seriously, so they're a little bit more motivated. And something you, Melina, also mentioned that maybe we kind of took for granted was the setting expectations. Maybe we have to model for them what a successful discussion will look like before we even ask them to do it. So give them some examples, maybe show a video, teach them some vocabulary, and yeah, and everything will go together in tandem. Yes, it's going to take a little bit of time, but if it's repetitive, I mean, it's used multiple times throughout the semester, I think it's definitely worth it.
And I think I could also add, like for this case study, I think it will be best if we can try to mix like the international students with the Chinese students, so they are like encouraged to talk to each other. Because if we just split Chinese with the international, I think maybe some local students they tend to talk in Mandarin. But if they have like a friends international friends, I think they have to and they could be confident in talking English.
Thank you. So between the three of us, we mentioned several different possible strategies for this one case scenario, right? And you might have mentioned the same ones, or even thought of how to use one of the strategies that we didn't discuss. But I think that the idea is here, like, maybe if I'm like, oh, I want them to do a group discussion, maybe we take the group discussion, we turn it into a problem-based learning, a PBL. Or maybe we take it and, you know what, before I have them do it, like, we set the expectations, model, and then anticipate where they can use the learning. And if we do it more than one time, like Boyan was saying, use that throughout the semester, reinforce those strategies, then we're reinforcing the expectations that students are going to transfer their learning, right? So thank you very much for sharing. I hope this was useful. I think I'm just going to mention one of the other case studies. Oops, case studies. I left the clicker over here. One of the other scenarios, just because I know it's a common one. Let's see. No, not this one. Here. So an example is an EMI material science class. In an EMI material science class, students perform well on quizzes, the tests, definitions, and formulas. However, when they're asked to apply the same concepts to a new case study, many students are confused. They're like, they ask, is there a formula for this? And the professor realizes students do not see how classroom learning connects to real engineering problems. This makes project work slow and frustrating. I'm not going to take a long time to do a discussion, just want to briefly mention like this kind of thing. We could use both hugging and bridging strategies as well. You might take this and make it a PBL, a problem-based learning, and where you're taking a case study and you're breaking it into parts, or maybe doing multiple case studies to try and solve a particular problem. So using different case studies as with matching. So like the realistic materials, so they can see, oh, this is how we'll have done it outside of the classroom, you know. So if we're just saying, okay, here's what we did in class, and we give them a test, and we're not trying to bridge or use hugging strategies to connect it, they might miss it. And I'm sure all of us have experienced that, and it can be really frustrating. So the purpose here, just for time, is I just want to emphasize that, you know, this is another common problem that we as educators face, and these strategies can help with this problem as well. So for the last part, I would like to have you do a little practice, a transfer promoting classroom activity, and I'll hand out the paper in just a moment. But you're going to be looking at, choose one of your classes, and think about a learning objective. And so you're considering what you want students to be able to do at the end of an activity, and how can you measure that outcome. And then what hugging and or bridging strategies can help you accomplish that learning objective. And then also, how can you make students aware of the transfer opportunity? So to give an example, this is going back to what we already talked about. These were our learning objectives for our workshop. And the hugging and bridging strategies I listed over on the right. So I tried to the best of my ability. Doesn't mean I've done any of these things perfectly today. But I tried to model, demonstrate how you'll do things. I tried to set expectations, what you'll do and how you'll do it. Matching, trying to give you the scenarios which are realistic to your situation. I've tried to give you time to reflect on your own situations. And then anticipating application, this design activity we're going to take the last few minutes to do, I hope that you will actually use later. Okay. So this is just an example in a course, what it might look like. So not our workshop, but let's say it's an EMI data structures course, and we have a mixed audience of Taiwanese and international students. So the learning objective might be something like students choose and justify an appropriate data structure based on constraints, not habit, and then a near and a low road transfer strategy. Students solve a programming problem using a familiar structure. And they're relying on previously practiced procedures. The high road far transfer could be the same problem is reframed with new constraints. And then require students to identify key decisions, decision rules, and select a different structure. Now they have to think about how would they do that. And then the negative transfer, we also want to think about, students could negatively transfer. It's possible, but hopefully we're using hugging and bridging strategies to facilitate positive transfer. Okay, so we'll do 10 minutes, and I did put on here, I hope that for the first 5 minutes, just think from your brain. Then at the last 5 minutes, if you want to put it, if you want to give a prompt to one of the possible AIs that's out there, try it. I've actually used AI in my class about this topic. I've used it even in this workshop, getting ready for this workshop. Like I put this in, what do I get back? If you'd like to, you can, but I'd really love for you to consider first metacognitive reflection. Just do it on your own for the first 5 minutes, okay? I will hand out the paper. Doesn't mean you have to be done. think I left the microphone over there, sorry. We're almost out of time. So I wanted to have an extra 5 minutes. I apologize for not having enough time to be able to have you debrief with each other. But I hope that thinking through a possible activity for your own class has prompted you to think about how you can use these strategies, which is really the goal, right? Transfer your learning. Doesn't mean you have to do the exact activity that you wrote down. But I do hope that it's giving you some ideas to address some of the challenges that you face as EMI professors. I know you have different language proficiencies, students from different countries in the same class. You know, there are lots of different factors that are important for your classes. So I hope that some of these strategies you'll be able to include and apply in your own classes. Maybe even starting tomorrow, but like maybe something, you know, 1 or 2 by the end of the semester. And if not this class, this semester, hopefully next semester, as you're thinking about, you know, especially the whole course design. So I have, I'll put my contact information, right here. The last little bit was to be your, the L at the end, what did you learn? This is the last part of the KWL, but just because of time, I don't want to keep you past 4 o'clock. But if you have a minute, you want to think about what is one thing I learned and write it down to complete the KWL chart. It's again a reflective metacognitive part of strategy. So if you would like to contact me in the future, my email is up here. I can help you find the resources for language learning, like your English language learners and that sort of thing, as well as do consultations and observations of your classes. And we have other EMI advisors here as well who can do the same thing. I also have my card if you're interested in it, but I hope that I'll be seeing you guys again in the future, either at workshops or getting to come to your classes. That would be even better. And I want to thank you for coming today. Thank you very much.